I'll figure it out.
It's actually really annoying. You know, the one feature we don't have is to set up recurring things in the calendar. So you have to set up each one of them individually. So clearly, when I was doing it, I got distracted or angry.
I think I just broke the calendar. Okay. No, it's all right. It's okay.
Don't break the calendar.
What am I going to call it? DT. Oh, now it's gone.
For Business Week 4 webinar. Yeah, I've actually double booked for that night. I realise I've actually got something else on, but I need to change the other thing because even though you're running it, I wouldn't miss the last one. That would make me sad.
Oh, it'd make me sad.
Could make everybody else very happy, but you've I've made it this far.
The 24-hour clock, yes.
Yeah, 24-hour clock and go for it. So I might pull up a presentation, hey, and get ready to do that.
I'm thinking for business.
Let's go with this. I think
I might just put it. Oh, that'd be funny. I could put it in the MTIS calendar. That would be funny.
That is not what I want to do.
All right, it's in the calendar now.
Okay. My guess is that is also not what I want to do. I'm just going to try and bring my presentation up. One day I'm going to practice this in advance.
Oh, hello.
Okay, let's get this right. Sorry. Okay, I can't minimize Zoom because I'm recording the meeting. Fair enough. Okay, you don't have to tell me twice. Actually, you do. Then I do this.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. I've lost my voice, so I can hardly talk.
Well, you better stop talking then.
Okay, sorry. Oh, too much sugar in those things. They're not good for you. All right. I have to convince my PowerPoint to go on a different screen from the one it wants to go on. And then I should be able to share it with you without having to share in a silly way. So that just means I need to hit that button, do that, hide that, go back to Zoom. Sorry, it's very boring as I go through my process here. And then it should actually share. All right. Sorry about that. Ever diminishing numbers, but I think we're ready to start. Actually don't have a lot this week because the focus for this week really needs to be on you guys finishing your reports and really starting to pull the ideas together to complete some journals and then write that final reflective / analytical essay. So let's go. So basically this is the second half of the what work stage, and we're going to talk about the learning launch in particular. So part 2, again, where are we? We're really on the return journey now. So now is a really good time for you to be consolidating what those gifts are that you're going to bring and bring home with you, but also to be thinking about quite critically what things you've learned in the process or that you've begun to explore and how you might use them, how might we use these gifts in your personal lives, in your business lives, but in particular in the other MBA subjects that you're doing. So what tools might you put into that toolbox that you take away with you? Individual deliverables, just the journal again, but really you do need to focus now on cleaning up the journal, thinking about where you might need to expand or add comments if you think you do, so that you can finalise that. And also really going back through it, because that document itself, or that set of documents, should form a really good foundation for your reflective or final piece. So just remembering the question in relation to that too, typically asked, and good, the number one thing you should always think about when it comes to doing any kind of submission for your MBA or any university work is make sure you answer the question. So I just want to remind you in relation to your individual piece what the question is. So we call it a reflective piece, but it really is, it's got a really an analytical or a critical analysis bent to it. So you're asked, what is the strategic value and what are the potential limitations of applying design thinking within your organisation? Now, you can go as broadly or as deeply with that as you want to, but I would point out to you that your journals are going to be necessarily already broad. And so there is a real opportunity here for you to pick that one thing that you think is really going to make a difference to you. Or conversely, that really frustrated you and you thought was a complete waste of time, and to go deep. Because then you will be able to basically do the show-offy things that you need to do, because I'm always in favour of being strategic when it comes to the written assessment. I mean, I like you to learn as much as you can possibly during the process, but don't be at all shy about making sure you go through the rubric and that you are actually addressing each of the things in the rubric as well as you possibly can. So even before you start structuring, it's probably a good idea to, shall I say it, fall in love with the problem, because your problem for this particular exercise is to make sure that you demonstrate as many of those things as you can to us so that you make it easy for us to give you the best marks that we can give you. So again, when you had a chance to have a look at that, if you've got questions about what any of it means or how you're thinking about doing it and whether that makes sense, feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call. Sorry, wrong screen. Group tasks. The bulk of this will already be done by now. Between the exercises that you've done along the way and the presentations that you submitted overnight, really now is the time to consolidate. And probably just the things that we'll be talking about this week, I think might give you a focus for just giving this report a clean set of eyes and thinking about how to pull it together. Again, have a weather eye again before you get too committed to the words you put on paper to the marking criteria. I think this is really important to have a look at. At the end of the day, 45% of it is really about the quality of the content that you incorporate here. So again, make sure you answer the question, make sure that you're addressing the process, but also why your solution is the solution that the client should fall in love with, by explaining how you fell in love with their problem and the insights that you got along the way that have led you to pitching this solution as the best solution. So again, when we get to the learning launch, we need to think about how the product or service that has evolved out of that whole design thinking process, how you're going to launch it, and how you're going to truly know whether it is capable of achieving what the research and the work you've done so far would suggest it would. So just in order to provide you with some context for that, I think it's really useful to think about both an inside-out model and an outside-in model. So a traditional business focus for developing new products or services, or even just offering products and services, really has an inside-out focus. So it's looking at, well, what are the competitors doing? What are we doing? What are we good at? What do we offer now that nobody else offers? What do our competitors offer that we don't offer? What kind of channels or relationships do we have? And then what customers, who are the customers that we would sell this thing that we've developed based on those things? And for some businesses, that is going to always be the appropriate way of doing it. When you have deep expertise in making a particular widget that, I don't know, holds the bottom of a ship to the top of a ship, and you're the premier company for doing that in the world, and you've got the skills and you've got the patents, why would you do it any differently? You just continue on doing that thing. But and I guess we think about it from the point of view of when we think about customer value in that environment, we think about it as being the functional benefit of the thing that we sell them less the cost. So the problem there, it's just a pure financial equation. Is it worth more to them to buy the solution than it is not to have it? And then we sort of end up with a pricing formula almost as a consequence. So design thinking, though, fits better when we've got an outside-in scenario, or it provides us, even when we're starting in the first, to think about it from an outside-in scenario. So starting with thinking about what customers we want, and what the priorities of those customers are, then thinking about the ecosystem that exists for those customers' priorities to be met, moving into then thinking about, well, what have we got to offer? What is it that we could offer? What pains do those customers have, and what pain relievers could we develop? And then thinking about, well, actually, now that we know that what this thing is, or this service might be, or this product might be, we need to think then about what kind of business could offer that in a defensible way, that could offer, sorry, I've got myself all caught up by a distraction behind me. What kind of business design could result in defensible profits being made selling that service or product? Now, that in particular is, I suspect, going to be an issue for a number of you. I don't think I've really spoken to any of the groups in the last 10 days about what their sort of most likely product or service offering was going to look like. But a few that I had a couple of weeks ago, one of the sort of big questions was, who's going to pay for it? How are you going to make money out of doing this? And again, that's something that at this final stage, even if you don't know the answer to that, this is something that you need to be able to work out a plan for working out the answer to that as we go into this launch stage. And then finally, once we know that we've got a business, or we believe that we've got a business, then it's, what do we need to do to execute the design? So it's about executing the design, not designing as such. So what is this learning launch I keep talking about, and how is it different from co-creation? So Liedekern Ogilvy, I think I variably spelt Ogilvy the whole way through. I tend not to be looking at something when I do it. And I think sometimes it gets a Y and sometimes it gets an IE. And I really wish Canvas had a spell check or something I could search for that in. But I suspect that one's wrong. Somebody might like to point it out to me. But it would be good. Attention to detail is often rewarded. So I'm just calling out my own slide here, just in case. If this one's right, there are other ones that are wrong, to be fair. So anyway, Liedekern Ogilvy call it customer co-creation in 4D, where customer co-creation, which we talked about last week, is around dealing with customers, talking to them about your prototype, moving from paper prototypes to maybe just something that's pretty rough around the edges. We spoke about the benefits of allowing some room for the customer's emotional responses and imaginative responses as they look at the product. Learning launch is really, I mean, at the end of the day, we've called it beta, we've called it pilot, we've called it lots of things. I love the term learning launch for a couple of reasons that I'll share with you in a minute. But at the end of the day, this is where we're looking for customers who've got some skin in the game, and we're testing what really happens, not just what might happen next. We're testing what the customers do as opposed to what they say they might do. So it's all about market-driven data. And really what we're doing at this stage is trying to work out whether or not our idea has enough merit to warrant a detailed investigation and the commitment of real resources in real time. So where did this idea of the learning launch come from? So again, Jeannie Ledeker comes from Darden, and prior to writing the book that we've used as our text, she was involved in the Growth Leader Research Project. The other lead researcher on that is a guy called Hess. And a large part of their focus, I have to wait till Lucas comes to join us. That's one of my favourite parts of these classes. Good to see you, mate. So one of the things that they were looking at to work out what you needed, were there any patterns about successful innovation? They were looking at successful entrepreneurs, and they came up with these 4 criteria. And these form the basis of the things that we're looking for when we do a learning launch. So we're starting with the entrepreneurial mindset of action and not analysis. So a learning launch is about doing. So no analysis paralysis here. This is all about launch, test, check, assess, tweak, iterate, repeat, or kill. So, and Ledeker and Ogilvy would suggest, and this is consistent with the stuff that the Deagle School guys say at Stanford, who are the IDEO model, but also the British Design Council model that we keep coming across, that you really can't be sure that you've tested properly until you've done this at least 3 times.
Kath, can I maybe just pose a question to the group? Who wants to have a go at what do you think an entrepreneurial mindset is? Maybe what's the difference between an entrepreneur and an innovator, for example?
Good question.
To make money?
Yeah, but what is it that makes you can have a business person that's not necessarily an entrepreneur?
Probably an entrepreneur, an innovator knows the solution first, but the entrepreneur he tries to understand the problem first.
Yeah. There's a key attribute that sets them apart, I think. And I guess the word is risk. So an entrepreneur is the one that's willing to take the risk. An innovator will, come up with a solution. An entrepreneur might engage innovators to come up with a solution, but they're the ones that potentially to take a risk. So someone like Richard Branson, for example, is an entrepreneur. He's not necessarily an innovator, but he's an entrepreneur that will take risks to grow his businesses. So just to sort of get it clear what that entrepreneurial mindset is, that's about taking risk, taking action.
And I think the action is the really important part. I mean, at the end of the day, all business is about risk at a level, but the risk appetite of entrepreneurs tends to be significantly higher. And it's not a mathematical or a financial equation all the time. There can be that kind of the gut call, but the good entrepreneurs also know when to cut their risk, cut their losses, and they will be prepared to lose everything, but they manage that process by being clear on what they will and won't address. Which brings me to the next point. It's also around speed. Successful entrepreneurs, they don't suffer from analysis paralysis. They set up experiments, they take those risks, but they do it in a very short time frame. So they push really hard, and they do go to it with an attitude of, we want this to work. So they will throw absolutely everything into an experiment that is focused on trying to work out whether it will work or not. They give it every opportunity, but they constrain it by time. And the third one, engaging potential customers. Now, we've started that already, or we've started talking about, at least, in the idea of the co-creation, of sitting down with one customer at a time and observing and walking them through the prototype. But now we're talking about engaging our beta testers or running pilot projects, or running projects where we're co-investing with our customer with a view to both of us getting a win-win outcome. And then the most important, I suspect, is an approach that looks to learning the whole time, to constantly iterating and improving. So somebody's typing there and I don't know who you are.
That's me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. I'm just going to mute you for a second. It makes me feel listened to. It's very exciting. So many of you will remember this Venn diagram that we looked at way back in the first week. This test, or this test is the wrong word, I think. This approach that design thinking is looking to ensure that the solutions that we find meet this triple criteria of desirability, feasibility, and viability. And so really it's only at this stage that we can really understand whether or not the desirability and the viability assumptions that we've made, in fact, are going to be appropriate. We know up to this point a range of things. So we've done some deep persona work that's not just, I hope, picked out of the air, but based on a deep understanding and analysis of who our potential stakeholder or customers are. We've used the persona tool so that we can really engage on an emotional level. So that's kind of, but at the same time, that's still a fiction. It's a well-developed character, but it's still a fiction. And then we've gone into our, we've had interviews and observations, and we've pulled all of that stuff together. But then we've drawn from the insights on that, and then we've, at a later stage, gone to the customer for a co-creation. We've got their insights. We know what they say about the product. We know what they say about what they do or what they will do in response to it. We know what they say about pricing and a range of different things, but we haven't actually seen them do it yet. So the learning launch is really about testing whether there are gaps between what people say they do and what they actually do. And then learning too what assumptions we've made about the costs or the process of building, delivering, packaging, supplying, which of those are working and which aren't. Because we've been doing this in a rapid fire way so far. Oh, every time I move, it changed. So how do we think about this strategically? So, and again, I know we've been mentioning strategy a little bit more over the last couple of weeks, and that's where we're going to end up. We're going to be thinking about the strategies for using these tools and how using design thinking fits with strategic thinking. So I guess I kind of like this cycle, or putting it in a cycle. I still have to play with this a little bit, I suspect, but essentially where I started here was this idea that, okay, we can start. And so we do some work, which is this what is stage, where we're working out, well, this is what the customer says that they want. And then we work from there to work out what they're likely to do. And then as we've gone into the what if stage, we've done more work to understand what pains they have and how they might be relieved. In the what wow stage, we've done some ideation and we know what we've got to offer. And then as we've moved further into what wows, as we've then gone from the divergent thinking back into the convergent thinking stage, and we've isolated, we've tapped back the great number of ideas we have to the ones that are going to work, then we start to think about what's most likely to be feasible. And then we start co-creating. We get to the stage of talking to customers about what they do. And then at this stage too, we might even be in the learning launch. So we're observing what they actually do. We can test assumption. And then because we've reached that stage, we can then stop, observe, use some of these skills that we used right at the very beginning to reiterate, to iterate, to tweak, to revise, and then basically start again. And as I mentioned before, most of the reading says you'll be looking to do this at least 3 times before you're ready to actually put a fully flown product to market. But I think those times are getting shorter and shorter. And I think how many of us buy apps regularly for our smartphone. Even as little as 5-7 years ago, the idea of just randomly spending a couple of bucks to sort of see what an app would do just wasn't something that was regularly part of our lives, for many of us anyway. Where now I think we've got used to that short turnaround time as customers as well. And we're happy to actually buy something now and expect it to get better over time. So I think those timeframes and those iterations are probably being squashed. And I think customers are buying things, particularly when it's a low risk purchase, that actually wouldn't have been good enough to be launched in a previous time. So what's the purpose of doing this learning launch? It's absolutely to learn. And this is actually why I like the term learning launch as opposed to pilot or beta test. And that's because if you decide to pull the pin at the end of a pilot, it's a failure. Where if you decide to pull the pin at the end of a learning launch, that's actually a success. That's actually celebrating or addressing the fact that you have actually saved a whole lot of money because you have worked out that this isn't going to meet that feasibility, desirability, profitability test. So this comes straight from the learning guide actually. To be successful, learning launches must quickly determine the validity of key underlying value generating assumptions. And learning launches should be designed as low risk or as affordable loss ways of testing. And I want you to think about that when you're finalising these group reports that you're doing now. Because your group reports, as groups, you've not got to the stage, well, clearly because of the logistics and the kind of fantasy world that we work in this, but you haven't actually got to the stage of launching it or doing this. But what I want you to do, what we want you to do, I should say, I'm getting all selfish here, but I want you to do it, is to really think about, well, if we were doing this in the real world, how would we do a learning launch? What would we test? What would we need to test? And that is, in a sense, the call to action in your report. It can be really hard to write a report without actually having a question that you're asking or some kind of call to action that you're asking your customer or your board or your sponsor or whoever it is that you're writing for to do. So if you're looking at your solution, by now you're at the stage where, for some very good reasons, you believe this is a solution that's worth testing. So the next stage is, well, how do you test it? What would you be looking for? How would you know? success or failure. So we've got to talk about the F word. Fail early, fail often, and fail smart. This graph basically shows, with a little bit of wobbliness because of the way I drew it, what the research shows is the difference in cost when we go from a standard project approach to a learning stage. So if we're actually looking at a project as having these three phases, so planning and development, procurement and production, test, delivery, and launch. So basically what the design thinking process gives us is an opportunity to delay our costs until to reverse the where we're spending our money on testing. So in fact, and this isn't meant to compare dollar to dollar, but if we're doing a design thinking process and we're testing and iterating, the costs of error is potentially high at the beginning in the sense that we get rid of things, but it's really early. Where if we've got high cost of error at the point of time when we're launching our project, it's really too late. So what we're trying to do is look at, well, what is the best time for us to be spending money and resources on testing and understanding? And clearly, it's in the planning and development phase, particularly when we don't know what the right solution to our problem is. So again, wobbly drawing because I'm trying to reproduce what the texts say, but essentially a design thinking process suggests that the return on investment graph looks a little, well, it should look like the red line when we use a design thinking approach. Of course, at the end of the day, we might cut it much earlier. If we don't find a solution, we might cut it. But we have a more significant upfront investment early on. But the thing is, we're de-risking our project so much quicker that the return on investment should be here. So, and again, ROI is a term you're going to hear a lot. I probably won't use return on investment again. I'm just cognizant that many of you are doing business subjects for the first time. So again, a lot of entrepreneurial startup literature talks about celebrating failure. I think that's a bit twee, the language myself. I think it's not about celebrating failure. Welcome it because you can learn from it. But there's no point just, having beer and saying I'm awesome just when you hit failure. Failure is about an opportunity to learn. So, over to you. Although I think I might have answered my question earlier, but how is a learning launch then different from customer co-creation? And from your point of view, would you separate them out? Would you run them together? Would you always do them at the end? What thoughts do you have?
Hey, Kat.
Yeah.
I come from a manufacturing background.
Yeah.
And to me, prototyping has to bring the final answer before we go into launch. So I'm a bit confused between learning launch and prototyping, because to us, you prototype until you reach the final step.
Again, depending on what you're actually, what you're manufacturing, like clearly, if you are manufacturing parts for the space shuttle, I am absolutely certain that the final product will have, you're literally not going to launch until that thing is right. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if we go back to that graph that we're looking at, and go back the other way. if we go back and look at this, I'll just get another colour up so we can talk about it. We're thinking about manufacturing. So let's just say that we've got a problem and we are a provider of products. So at the end of the day, the only kind of solution that we're looking at is going to be a manufactured product. So if we were using a design thinking approach for doing that, early on in the stage, we might look at a number of different approaches and we might paper prototype them. And then, oh goodness me, and then we pick one and we take it maybe into a customer co-creation exercise. So we actually spec it out, we do the first level design drawings, we have CAD stuff. These days, actually, you might even be using, you might 3D print something, or you might even use some virtual reality or augmented reality so that your customers could have a look at it, turn it around through their 3D glasses or whatever, before you go to the full cost of making out your prototype. Sorry, that keeps moving around.
Even in that instance, sorry, Kath, to cut you off, but even in that instance, your customer co-creation could have occurred at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Or could have even been a seed for an idea that led to this identification of the problem in the first place.
Absolutely. And I think we've said this a few times. I mean, we look at this beautiful pattern and, you know, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, we do it in that order. And we've very purposefully stopped you guys from running ahead or going backwards by, you know, only releasing materials week by week so that you're working together along this synchronous path. But actually the design process, I think that very first drawing, it often, you know, we start here and then we go all over the place. We go back to before where we started, we do a bit of this and it moves around. And in fact, it doesn't matter if we go 1, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, keep moving it around. But before you actually go to market, you might have a number of different prototype phases at different levels of fidelity. And I'm sure that happens now, doesn't it?
Yep.
So is that making more sense to you?
Yeah, no, 100%, because I think in one of the individual assignments, I did mention I think it was a fear factor which Mark wanted us to put in.
Yeah.
You know, when we do this repeated iteration, the main concern is time. You know, how many times can we keep going back, because our ideas can never, matching our ideas or our solution to the customers is it's a bit of a difficult task, really.
I guess the number of times you go back depends on your budget.
True.
Well, and it also might depend on the quality and the fidelity of your first round prototypes.
Yeah.
So if you're actually prepared to bring the customer in or get more detailed specifications in relation to costs, etc., earlier, which is increasing your upfront cost here. You're making it more expensive than it might have been on the normal curve. Sorry, let me get rid of that so that it's making a little bit more sense. So you're investing a little bit more at the beginning, but exploring multiple low fidelity outcomes. Then you can go to a second lot of, 2 or 3 choices and then keep moving through. And the reality is the cost of prototyping is being reduced massively by improvements in technology. And I'm sure you would be seeing that in your industry, yeah?
Yeah, sure, 100%. Yeah, for sure.
And the cost of prototyping is also offset by the reduction in risk down the track. Yeah,
true.
So you are moving some cost into this space, potentially, but you're also pulling
the risk back
forward as well.
Yeah.
Really.
No, true. No, quite an interesting approach, because we've always thought the more you prototype, for us it's about risk reduction initially at the prototyping stage and not at the learning launch stage.
But again, so it might be too that you're needing to look at the customer co-creation stage a little bit more in a bit more depth.
True. I
Low
think
fidelity.
automation for us comes at a very early stage,
Mm.
probably number 1 and not at 3.
Yeah, interesting.
Hmm.
So that makes your number 1 ideation stage very difficult
Yes,
in the sense that your customer has already decided what this looks like.
exactly. And when there's a wide customer base, each of whom who want a different product, it gets quite interesting to actually come up with a common solution.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I guess that, again, begs the question is, do you need a common solution? Maybe it's the uncommon solution that, how might we create the uncommon solution?
Yep. No, very interesting.
But, I mean, these are all, at the end of the day, the benefit of these things is the thought model as much as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to continue on. I did ask my question before, but I sort of have asked and answered it. I think holding on to these points is really important. Just remembering that people don't always do what you think they do. They don't always do what you tell them to do. They don't always do what they think they do. And they don't always do what they say they do. Need to correct my slide there. And I think that's really important. The real value in much of this research is around understanding the value in actually observing what people do in the wild. One of the things I enjoy the most when we, in my entrepreneurial life, when we've got to the stage of providing test sites for people to have a look at. So I work largely with financial services technology. And it's almost invariable. We kind of run bets on it in the office as to how long it will take for somebody to find a way of using the service that we're offering in a way we didn't expect. And basically with 3 quite serious product launches, the first one, it took about a month. So it was quite, which we thought was really amazing that somebody came up with a whole different business plan of approach to use this tax software. The other 2 products is within a day that we were having calls saying, can we use it in this way if we structure it like this? And it's like, yeah, actually you could. What's really interesting is when you're observing again, my experience is largely watching people use software. And for those of you who have nothing to do with software, there are so many creepy applications now. Pretty much anybody who uses any of our systems, I can get a video of what they've done on screen just with the numbers and personal information blurred out. So I can see and, just play recordings in real time of how people move around the software. I really wish they'd do that with Canvas, or that they'd watch them, by the way. But I find that really interesting because you can talk to them and say, well, what were you trying to do? And they tell you lies. Actually, and that's not fair. They're not really telling you lies. I think they believe that they did something. But when you actually look at what they did something quite different. And I suspect, I believe that that's the same with almost any product and service. If you ask somebody, how often do you wash your car? And then you actually look at how often they actually wash their car, the answers might be quite different. Did you know that 80% of men in Australia, if asked, will tell you they're above average drivers? So I suspect that at least 30% of them are wrong. So maybe more. So being able to actually unpick and see what people really do as opposed to what they say they do.
That's why more men drown than women.
Oh, yeah, because you're all above average swimmers too.
They think we can all swim across that lake.
Yep.
That would drop the average
I hope
as
it's
well.
feeling all safe because I just updated my CPR certificate this week. So,
Yes.
there's any first aid emergencies, I'm on it today.
Online, can you do
Oh.
CPR online? There's an app for that, surely.
Surely. Yeah, actually, there is. That's how we had to do our training with the app. So, yeah, just in case you know. But I could talk someone through it. I really think that the prototyping phase, which we really start in the what works phase, but we really draw on again in a customer co-creation phase, I think particularly at the high fidelity level is really just a walk into the learning launch. That if at the point of time when we're actually launching a product and using it in real time, if we see it as version 1 and expect that it will follow soon after with version 2 or 2.1 or whatever that happens to be, I think that too is part of the learning launch. Understanding that the day that you start selling is quite different from the day that you stop developing your product is just part of a design thinking mindset. This one, I don't think I put the source on it, but this is actually a really great design thinking story, which was around trying to reduce the number of infant deaths, mortality rates in the southern Saharan Africa, where at nighttime temperatures drop really dramatically. And because many women are undernourished, they often have premature babies. And so they were really looking at, well, how can we have this thing that keeps these babies warm, that's easy to transport, that isn't expensive, that can be reused. And you can sort of see this process of going through the prototyping stage, which is quite lovely. So, yes, you have a task this week as a group again. I think this is a task that will slot very neatly into finishing up your group reports, because I want you to just use the template that's in the text, or be brave and use it in a different way. I was looking today at some of the design criteria, and there's one group, you know who you are, who just ignored the template that the textbook gives you entirely and provided the objectives, which I thought was great. It's like they created their North Star document with 10 or so points. It was probably the shortest of the lot of them, and there are a number of groups that had real problems containing that to a page. But again, like, use the model, but if you think you can do it in a better way and you've got a reason not to use the model, do what works for you. So this is basically the template for the learning launch design that comes out of the textbook. Read chapter 12 of the textbook, have a look at this tool, and think about how you're going to create a learning launch for your solution. And feel free to make that the call to action, getting the budget or the approach to doing this. So this is from the task itself, and these are the things I'd be very interested to hear either why they're wrong or what else you should put in there. But I think these are the things that you need to pay attention to at this late stage with your project. And this is part of getting that convergent thinking of bringing it back and focusing the solution that no doubt some of you are in love with on ensuring that you are answering the question and solving the problem. So what kind of boundaries are you going to apply? It's good to have an end date. Think about that entrepreneurial mindset set of action and speed. The key assumptions. Now, you've already, over the last couple of weeks, you've been really drawing and pulling out those key assumptions. But in particular, you've got to think about the ones you haven't tested yet. The things that are going to go to the feasibility or the viability of your offering. This one is a little bit more kind of airy-fairy, thinking about the team. Now, obviously as CLNs, the team you have is the team you have, but you might like to, as a team, think about what would be the features of the ideal team to launch this. What kind of discipline mix might you have? What kind of personality mix might you have? Feedback cycles. How are you going to get feedback? How often are you going to get it? What form is it going to take? How much of it will be Q&A? How much of it will be observation? How much of it will be just dollars in the kitty? And how are you going to manage those processes? How will you make it feel real? How will you make it like launch into it as if there is no end date, even though you know that there will be? Backup plans. All of the literature talks about having a plan B. In fact, my business partner so often talks about plan B that I want to put it on a t-shirt for him. You know, it's just like, it's amazing how plan B suddenly becomes plan A, and that means we've got a different plan B. It's like, I feel like I can't keep up. And I think I've added this last one, 8, how you might use some social technologies in your learning launch. The chapter in your text talks quite a bit about the potential benefits of social media in monitoring your launch and its success. But it's interesting, that book was written in 2011, published in 2011. The actual paragraph in it says, for the last 3 years, we've had those technologies. So effectively, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, whatever it is that you think, Instagram, you think might be a useful way of monitoring success, if any of them are, have all been around for twice as long since that book was written than it was at the time it was launched. And I think has become a much more well understood tool for understanding and identifying stakeholder reactions and breaching their privacy along the way, perhaps. So that's all I wanted to say. Happy to chat further about any of that. But there's one more slide at the end, so a reminder, that's all. Questions, concerns, frustrations, compliments, interpretive dance, a cappella singing. Finished early. Well, you all know how to find me if you want to chat along the way. Oh, I thought I did have a slide. It's gone. I am duty-bound to remind you that there is a course experience survey that you have been asked to complete. In the way of RMIT, it might be called something different from a course experience survey. It's referred to the teachers as a CES, but it's often called different things. They're really important to do, and we would be very, very grateful if you take a little bit of time to do them. I know any of you who call me, you know that I'm going to ask you for some direct feedback, and you still have the opportunity to provide feedback direct to Mark and I on the Google form that I circulated beforehand. But at the end of the day, the only real way the university knows what Mark and I are doing in the virtual classroom is what you tell them. So you have an enormous amount of power there. Wield it respectfully if you can. And
I think more importantly though, Kath, it's an opportunity for us to improve the course next time around.
Well, that's exactly it. And where I was going with that is try and give us the kind of feedback that you want for yourself. If you think this is a fabulous course, that's ace, but it's mostly helpful if you tell us why it's worked for you. Mm-hmm. And if you think it sucks, that's disappointing, and I really would have appreciated you raising that with us a little earlier than now. But again, if you can be as specific as possible about what hasn't worked, and if you have ideas or suggestions that for whatever reason you haven't wanted to share with us, please share them, because you guys really have been our learning launch. on this particular course. This is the first time it's been offered 100% online. And I certainly have learnt a lot from observing you. I only wish that I could see what you see on the screen. That would make it a little bit easier. But overall, it is really important. And thank you to those of you who've already done it.
Thank you. I've done it.
Oh, good.
Thanks, Imran.
Thank you.
All right. Well, unless anybody else has anything more they want to contribute here, we will see you all next week. We'll finish with wrapping it all up, looking at strategy. Mark will lead the last session.
Just got a question from.
Oh, sorry.
When do we think we'll get feedback in our group presentations? Good question. Kath and I made a pact this morning.
We did. There was virtual blood.
Yes, that we'll try and get that done by Wednesday evening. So I've already started to have a look at a couple. So Kath and I are going to work to get that done. So hopefully we'll get that sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So,
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. And look, there's been, for a couple of reasons outside our control, there's been a little bit of a lull in getting some feedback to you over the last couple of weeks. But I actually spent a bit of time today. I think between us, we'll catch up. Wednesday should be a big day. So. Right. There's been an announcement with some materials that might, last week, that might help you with the framework of the reports as well. But anyway, I'm going to suggest that you guys go and get an early night after a late one last night, for some of you at least. You get better, Imran, and leave Mark and I to do a little bit more feedback work this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Catch you guys later. Bye.
all right. Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.